Space, the final frontier. From our earliest days, humanity has gazed up at the stars with a primal desire to explore, to venture beyond the confines of our world and into the great unknown. It is the childhood dreams of many, the idea of floating weightlessly among the stars, witnessing breathtaking cosmic phenomena, and peering back down at our Earth. And it is a luxury very few have had the chance to experience. So what would happen if that dream, that ultimate aspiration, was suddenly within reach? What if ordinary people were given the opportunity of a lifetime to travel into space and orbit our precious planet? Well, in 2005, Channel 4 decided to do exactly this, to give 3 ordinary members of the public a once-in-a-lifetime experience, to become the first televised British space tourists. There was just one catch. The whole thing would turn out to be the biggest, most expensive practical joke in British TV history. Now I know what you're thinking. Why on earth would Channel 4 decide to attempt such a ludicrous experiment? And were the participants really that gullible to be fooled into thinking they had actually traveled into space? In this video, we'll answer all of these questions and more as we take a look back at this ridiculous, outlandish, meticulously executed stunt. We'll relive how Channel 4 were able to pull off this audacious hoax and how they were able to convince the would-be astronauts that they really were in space. This is the story of Space Cadets. Before we get started, I would love for you to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, reality TV was experiencing a remarkable boom, with the likes of Big Brother and Survivor dominating the airwaves. And having found success with Big Brother, Channel 4 was keen on producing more content in the genre. Ben Caudell, an executive producer at Zeppotron, which was part of Endemol, the company that produced Big Brother, was the first to come up with the idea of Space Cadets. Growing up, one of his favorite movies was Capricorn 1, a film in which a reporter discovers that a supposed Mars landing by a crewed mission to the planet had been faked. And this got Ben thinking about if it would be possible to produce a reality TV show in which they would pretend that people were going to the moon. The idea was mulled over in the coming months, and eventually the idea took shape. The plan was for a group of would-be astronauts to be convinced that they were going into space, when in actual fact they would never leave Earth. In the first episode of the show, we learned that in order to pull off this hoax, the first thing the show had to do was to build a believable Russian space facility in the UK. Actually sending them to Russia would have been too expensive, and so the team decided to use a decommissioned military base from the Cold War, Bentwaters Parks in Suffolk just outside Ipswich, as the fake Russian military base. In order to recruit some potential participants, the show placed an ad in the press. Those who responded believed they were applying to be on a show called Thrill Seekers, but the premise of the show was purposefully hidden from them during the recruitment process. 50 people were then invited to London for a day of psychological tests, in which the production team were looking for participants who were suggestible, people who are more likely to believe what they see and hear. The participants went through a series of tests in order to narrow the field down, including a dot pattern test, a marbles in a jar test, various claustrophobia tests, and a strange test that saw them dancing in a room blindfolded. Back at the base, the production team got to work transforming it into a genuine-looking Russian military base. All of the plug sockets were changed, Russian signs were put up, all traces of English were removed, and they even did some grocery shopping to fill the base with only Russian products. Every little detail had to be considered in order to fully immerse the Space Cadets and add to the believability of the situation. Meanwhile, the potential participants were taken up to the Lake District to be put through a series of physical tests, including hiking through a rugged landscape, abseiling down a 90-foot sheer rock face, and a 30-foot jump off a bridge into the freezing waters below. The first episode concluded with the 12 successful participants being informed that they had actually been selected to become the very first televised British space tourists. Joy erupted in the group as they boarded a flight bound for Russia. Little did they know that there were actually 3 actors among them, Charlie, Rainey, and Steve, and that the flight they were on wouldn't go anywhere near Russia. Instead, they took off from Biggin Hill Airport in South London, circled around in the North Sea for 4 hours, and landed at Lydd Airport in Kent, only around 50 miles from where they first took off. From there, they flew a 1-hour trip in a Sikorsky helicopter to the fake Russian military base, named Krimsk, which is an actual town in Russia next to the Black Sea. Upon arrival at the base, the cadets were taken to their barracks, where they would spend the next 3 weeks of their lives preparing for a mission to space. After arriving at the base, the space cadets met Mission Commander James Campbell, played by an actor, who helped to reinforce the lie that they were on the base to train to become space tourists. After a quick shot of Russian vodka, the cadets got some rest, and the next day their training began. Over the course of the next few weeks, the cadets attended a series of lectures to teach them everything they needed to know about going into space, including first aid and safety, what space actually is, the history of space tourism, spacesuits, Tai Chi for relaxation, zero gravity training, despite the fact that they won't even experience weightlessness, and how to live in space. Their first lecture was with Commander Campbell, who introduced the fake organization STAR, or the Space Tourism Agency of Russia, and Earth Orbiter 1, the spaceship the cadets will board on their journey into space. As mentioned earlier, the cadets won't experience weightlessness, and so this was one of the biggest obstacles to overcome in convincing the cadets later that they were in space. During this first lecture, James tells them that it is unlikely they will experience weightlessness and makes up some nonsense about the craft skirting the Earth's atmosphere and so still being tied to the Earth's gravity, meaning they won't feel weightlessness. In later lectures, the cadets would be told that Earth Orbiter 1 has anti-gravity generators on board that will simulate the Earth's gravity in the spacecraft. How the cadets were actually believing this, I will never know. After this, the cadets met Val, a genuine Russian ex-KGB Special Forces agent, who put them through a series of grueling physical tests over the next few weeks, pushing them to their limits, something actor Steve found to be a little too much. Steve would later get quite ill and was eventually removed from the base. During one lecture, the cadets were told the true story of Laika the dog, who flew aboard Sputnik 2 in 1957 and sadly perished due to overheating inside the spacecraft. But the lecturer tells them that the Dune song "Million Miles from Home" was actually dedicated to her memory, something that caused some of the cadets to tear up, apart from actor Charlie, who had trouble containing himself. After this, the cadets were told that Russia's first cosmonaut to successfully orbit and return to Earth was a monkey called Minsky, who is supposedly stuffed and kept on display at STAR, and that the city of Minsk is named in her honor. The lecturer even asks the cadets to pay their respects to the monkey every day when they see her. Another crazy lecture saw the cadets learn about communication in space using a series of ridiculously absurd acronyms and pictures.
Earth Orbital 1 to Capcom Crimps, I can see Rambo and the Fonz doing a high five.
Perfect.
And one lecturer even got dangerously close to blowing the entire show's cover and revealing they were actually in England.
It wasn't in Hollywood, it was in the UK, it was at Boreham Wood.
All right, you are. That's right, most of the film was filmed
Most of the film was filmed in the UK.
Yeah, when you say here, yeah, you mean Russia. Thank the Lord for mumbling. Not one of the cadets noticed.
As the weeks progressed and the training sessions grew increasingly surreal, it was fascinating to observe the unwavering trust the majority of the cadets had placed in the program's authenticity. There were certain occasional moments of skepticism, such as one cadet voicing doubts in her sleep.
Not foreign. They're not foreign. They're not foreign.
but the collective force of the group seemed to dispel any feelings of uncertainty, and I think this highlights one of the intriguing social experiments at play in the show. Despite mounting evidence suggesting otherwise, the cadets willingly suspended their beliefs, choosing to immerse themselves fully in the experience, and any flickers of doubt that momentarily surfaced were swiftly extinguished. At the end of episode 5, we learn that the 4 cadets making the trip into space would be Paul, Carrie, Billy, and actor Charlie, whose job would be to try to alleviate any doubts the other cadets had and help convince them that they were actually in space. In the following episode, we learn more about the fake spacecraft Earth Orbiter 1. The shuttle simulator, assembled in a soundproofed hangar on the base, was a wooden replica built for the film Deep Impact that also later featured in the movies Armageddon and Space Cowboys. A considerable amount of work went into developing the shuttle for this show, including extensive surround sound, special cushions under the corners of the shuttle that could enable it to move, and a giant projector screen that was positioned in front of the shuttle's windows on which graphics of the Earth's surface could be displayed. For its time, it did look impressive, but would it be enough to fool the space cadets? In the lead up to the launch, the cadets attended a press conference and answered questions about how they were feeling about the voyage ahead, and were then able to see Earth Orbiter 1 for the first time. Of course, there was no giant space shuttle for them to see, so the show put on a Hollywood-style visual with a fake nose cone sticking out of a smoky aircraft hangar, and it seemed to convince the cadets. After a short stay back at the barracks, the time had finally arrived for the cadets to don their spacesuits and board Earth Orbiter 1 for takeoff. This would be the first real big test for the show, convincing the cadets that the simulator they would enter was actually taking off and heading into space. The launch of Earth Orbiter 1 was a carefully choreographed affair. The 2 pilots, both actors, communicated with mission control as they taxied out to the runway and prepared for takeoff. The cadets were all smiles in the back, fully believing that they are about to do something extraordinary. But then, something went wrong. The simulator started to move, but there was no sound. An awkward silence filled the shuttle. But our actor pilots were able to ad-lib their way through it and keep the cadets believing that everything was on track. You could definitely see from the faces of the cadets that their minds are telling them something isn't right, but the overwhelmingness of the situation kept them convinced. Once the production team got the sound working again, the shuttle was a go for liftoff. The simulator shaked and tilted back as the loud sounds of rocket engines filled the spacecraft. Actor Charlie quietly spoke into his microphone to give us a sense of what it was actually like on board during takeoff. Clearly it wasn't as bumpy and jolting as a rocket launch would usually be, as 2 of the cadets even sat playing Thumb War. But nonetheless, the cadets seemed to be convinced that they were on a journey to 200 kilometers above the Earth's surface and into orbit. After solid rocket booster separation, the shuttle came back down level with the ground, and the fake anti-gravity generators kicked in. At this moment, Space Cadet Paul was so close to realizing what was going on. And just like that, the Space Cadets were in orbit. I will admit, on television the launch looked a little underwhelming. Because the cameras inside the simulator were moving with its motion, it was hard to get a feeling for what it was really like inside during the launch. But with the slow drip of misinformation continuing, the cadets remained disorientated just enough to believe this faked reality. As they changed from their spacesuits, the cadets definitely had some questions for the pilots about the launch. You could tell there were doubts in their minds, but the pilots did a great job in keeping them convinced that they were now in space. The cadets were then officially welcomed to the space family with a ridiculous pledge to Uranus, the Greek god of the heavens and the sky.
God of space. God of space. I stand before Uranus.
I stand before Uranus.
Begging for admittance.
Begging for admittance.
You are cosmonauts now.
Yeah.
Over the course of the next 5 days, the cadets conducted a number of scientific experiments on board Earth Orbiter 1. Well, I say experiments, they were more like elaborate joke experiments. First, they had to attempt making balloon animals, something Charlie got some help with from the production crew. And later, they attempted to get electrical devices working by plugging them into fruit. Unbeknownst to them, it was simply batteries in some of the devices that was causing them to work. I don't know what was going through their minds while they were doing these experiments, but surely they must have thought, what has this got to do with being in space? Cadets Paul and Billy even recorded a promotional advert for a fictional Russian pharmaceutical company.
Yeah, I'll take one of these fast-acting chip-off capsules. It'll get rid of your headache with the speed of light. Hey Paul, how's your headache?
What headache?
Chip-off capsules, fast-acting pain relief from the top of your head to the balls of your feet.
But perhaps the most spectacular moment of the trip for the cadets was being able to look back down at the Earth. Something that was almost ruined by a moth that was loose in the studio and threatened to fly in front of the CGI projector. Thankfully, the moth was caught, and the shutters at the front of the spacecraft were lifted to reveal the spectacular view of the Earth. The cadets were close to tears. Even actor Charlie said it was genuinely moving. His brain knew that it wasn't real, but he was completely immersed in the moment. Towards the end of the cadets' time on board Earth Orbiter 1, show host Johnny Vaughn secretly went on board the simulator to interview Charlie and one of the pilots, something that could have blown the show's entire cover if he was overheard. And later, after the other cadets who had remained on Earth were told what was really going on, that the whole thing was fake, they snuck on board Earth Orbiter 1 with Johnny to take a look at Earth from the windows at the front of the spacecraft. The looks on their faces when they were told about this elaborate hoax was priceless. And later, when they were interviewed in the studio, all of them stated that while there were some niggling doubts in their mind, they truly believed they were in Russia and that the other cadets had gone into space. As the cadets' time on board progressed, so did the show's absurdity, particularly in the final episode. At the start of this episode, Charlie pretends to be sick and enters the toilet to let off a stink bomb and pass a parasitic worm, something he and the actor pilots struggle not to laugh at. And after this, the cadets took part in a space funeral for a Russian celebrity dog called Mr. Bimby. This was a particularly hilarious segment of the show, where the cadets performed a less than suitable song they had written. I have no idea how Charlie was able to sing this without laughing.
We are flying on automatic.
We are the cosmonauts.
We are the chosen few. We are unique. Just doing what we do. There's nothing we can't handle.
After this, Mr. Bimby's ashes were dropped on the floor. This could have been the final straw in convincing the cadets that all of this was an elaborate hoax. Carrie seemed to know right away that this was a setup.
Damn it!
Frenchie, man, that's funny, dude. Frenchie, don't laugh, man.
And with that, the cadets' time on board Earth Orbiter 1 was almost over. They were told that they would be donning their spacesuits to go out for a spacewalk, but in actual fact, they were about to get a very rude awakening. By this point in the show, it's clear that the space cadets are starting to lean more towards the truth. All throughout their stay in space, they've come so close to realizing what is going on, and so it must have been in the back of their minds that they weren't really in space. But thanks to the actors on board, Charlie and the two pilots, they were able to keep the cadets believing just enough for the big reveal to work. The three cadets got into a special pod on the side of the spacecraft in preparation for their spacewalk when they were interrupted on a monitor by Johnny, congratulating them for taking part in a TV first, but not in the way they've been thinking. The cadets were then shown a montage of clips of them having their suspicions about the authenticity of their trip into space, before the front of the pod was opened to reveal a studio audience filled with their families, friends, and fellow space cadets who had stayed on Earth. The looks on their faces as they exited the pod wearing their spacesuits was of pure embarrassment, and I actually felt quite bad for them. It's never great to be on the receiving end of a practical joke, and this was one of the biggest ever pulled, and so I can understand why they felt so duped and used in a way. To end the show, the cadets learned who the actors were in their midst, how a lot of the information they had learned over the course of the last few weeks had been complete and utter lies, and how the producers of the show were able to pull off this elaborate ruse. The show's producers were clearly hoping for a massive gotcha moment, and likely believed that the cadets would have taken it lightheartedly, but you could tell how heartbroken the cadets were. Despite having their doubts over the last few days, they all looked deflated by the realization that it was all a joke, and perplexed as to why anyone would go to such lengths. Again, I kind of felt sorry for them, but it wasn't all bad. They each received £25,000 for their participation in the show, and they, along with the other cadets who remained on Earth, who had also each received £5,000, would be genuinely flown to Russia to attend astronaut training and be taken on a real zero-gravity flight, something that must have been incredible to experience. And with that, the biggest practical joke in TV history came to a close. Overall, I was entertained by Space Cadets. It wasn't the greatest reality TV spectacle we've ever seen, but it was certainly an interesting idea. Production boss Patrina Good said that the show was not intended to humiliate or embarrass people, more that they wanted them to be able to see the funny side of it. And I'm sure the cadets did see the funny side of it later, but that moment of embarrassment and complete shock wasn't as comfortable to watch as I thought it was going to be. The show's legacy will be that of a random, bizarre moment on British television that has long since been forgotten. If you've never seen it before, I would still recommend it, if only for the comedic moments that peppered the show's 10 episodes. Despite the whole thing being fake, it's clear that the show did have a profound impact on the cadets in some way. Billy was asked if he had any regrets about taking part in the show, to which he replied that he had actually learned something about himself. Looking back at the Earth from space got him thinking about life in general and how you treat people. And even if what he was looking at was fake, his emotions were real. And for just a moment, he was able to feel what it would really be like to be orbiting planet Earth, a feeling very few others have had the chance to experience. Overall, I'd give Space Cadets a 6 out of 10. The idea for the show was intriguing, there were some great comedic moments throughout, but the ending felt kind of flat, and it didn't have the impact I'm sure the show's producers were hoping for. Nevertheless, it had its place during a time when reality TV was at the height of its popularity, but I doubt anything like this would be commissioned ever again. Thanks for watching, everyone. This was something slightly different to the rest of the content I've uploaded to the channel so far, but I thought this show would be interesting to take a look back at. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's subscribed to the channel over the last couple of weeks. It's a pleasure to have you all here, and your support has been incredible. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do, and be sure to check out some of the other videos on the channel and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Next on the channel, we'll be taking a look at another classic British game show. Stay tuned for more. Thanks again, and see you in the next video.